the stimulus, all that borrowing and spending was wrong. Basically, we went, the idea of the Obama administration and the Congress was to stimulate consumption instead of stimulating production. Basically, they should have gone to businesses and business leaders and said, what can we do for you to produce the jobs and the growth that we need to get back on our feet? And that is to go for investment tax credits, business tax credits, none of this corporate bailouts, bailing out of GM, bailing out of California, bailing out of the states. The states, the cities, the school districts need to make hard choices. Either cut spending or raise taxes, but not to get continually bailed out. All we're doing is kicking that can down the road. This reminds me a lot of the FDR administration in 1933. They took the Great Recession from Hoover and made it into the Great Depression by continuing to borrow and spend for years and years and years and wondering why the unemployment rate didn't go down. The unemployment rate won't go down until businesses really believe that they have a future that is going to be profitable to them. No higher taxes, no more regulations, the cap and tax thing that you passed the House. If that had passed the Senate and had been installed in the Senate, thank you, Scott Brown, for being that 41st senator, we'd really be in trouble. It comes down to we have a government that is growing at a rapid rate at the cost of the private sector. Government doesn't produce the goods and services that we need. The private sector does. We have too many people in the wagon, not enough people pulling the wagon. And until that mentality changes, we're going to continue to be in trouble. Thank you.
And I think this is an example of the leadership issue. I mean, in the fall of 2008 to January of 2009, we were in a very, very bad spot, as I described. And do we really think we would be better off if we had just done nothing? You know, Dick keeps talking about, you know, the bailout of the banks. Would we really be better off if all 19 of our largest banks in this country had failed? When Lehman Brothers failed, the repercussions throughout the economy were devastating. We'd be better off if we just stood back and said, no, I don't like what they did, we're just going to let it fall apart. We'd be better off in that situation. We'd really be better off if we had hundreds of thousands of more jobs lost if GM and Chrysler were gone. If all of those jobs were gone and all of the suppliers that led into them were gone, we'd be better off right now? I don't agree with that. I mean, believe me, I didn't want to be where I was in January of 2009, facing a devastating economy, facing that level of unemployment, facing that level. We haven't had 6% contraction in the economy in my lifetime. But choices had to be made to stop it from falling completely apart. And those choices were made. Now, there were other voices, as I said, who said, we haven't done nearly enough. We have to spend more. We had a couple of more, sort of second stimulus bills in December and then I think in March or April of this year that would have spent another $175 billion and weren't paid for. And I voted against both of them. Now, a lot of the money in there, you know, there was money for FMAP, for Medicaid, so that states wouldn't have to start cutting off Medicaid. And I think that's important. I visited a assisted living center not far from here that treats people that have had colossal accidents. Some of them are old, some of them are younger, who need 24/7 care. Without that Medicaid funding, they would have had to shut down. So I voted for the bill that was paid for, that had offsets, so that we could cover that in a responsible way. Those are the responsible decisions. We don't need people just raging against it and saying we shouldn't do anything. We got tough decisions to make and we need an honest discussion of those decisions.
The question is, let's give an example, should GM and Chrysler have been allowed to fail? The answer is yes. GM and Chrysler would have, Chapter 13, they would have renegotiated with the bondholders, the stockholders, the union contracts, all their suppliers, and they would have reformed and they would now be a profitable company under a restructuring. Right now, GM is not a profitable company. I know they say they're making a profit or getting by, they're really not. Their costs are still out of control. It comes down to we do need to let businesses fail and get back on their feet. Other banks, big banks, small banks, medium-sized banks, credit unions, there's other lenders out there. Nobody should be too big to fail. And you set a precedent when you let corporations, especially the big crony corporations out there who are taking the big risk with their money that are supposedly backed by the money, stay in business. We need to let a big signal go out to the corporate world that if you're in business, you're not going to be there at taxpayer expense. Thanks.
Can I do one quick 30-second thing on that? Or I'll just take my time on the next question. He's a good moderator.
Thank you. You're being kind. Okay, the next one, we'll move to transportation, one of our favorite subjects around here. So, moving right along, the Chamber has transportation as one of its highest priorities. Two of the largest projects that are important to our community is the extension of SR 167 from Puyallup to the Port of Tacoma, and the infamous Cross-Base Highway. How will you help move these projects forward?
Well, let me tell you that transportation funding is very limited right now. There's not a lot of money at the national level. The role of the federal government is the interstate system. That's I-5. To put money into State Route 167 and State Route 704, the Cross-Base Highway, is not really a federal priority. If they can come up with some assistance here and there, maybe that's okay with interstates for 167 on I-5, that might be appropriate. But it really comes down to it isn't the role of the federal government to be playing this hierarchy of father figure, Uncle Sam, to be dealing out money for state routes and local roads. We need to make sure the interstate system is healthy, and if any place we need work right now is on Interstate 5, all the way especially through Pierce County, from the King County line down to Pierce County line. We need to have that HOV lane, some extra funding. The Cross-Base Highway was a good concept in 1985, but today it's not a viable concept. To take traffic from East Pierce County to move it west onto I-5. If anybody's driven in front of Fort Lewis and McCord in the last 4 or 5 years, it's deadlock. You get to right about exit 125 in Lakewood, and it comes to a dead halt until you get to about the Nisqually Bridge. To think that we don't have an east-west problem, we have a south-north problem. If we need to put any money, it would be in the Canyon Road, get it north to 167. 167 is a real jobs maker, and if anything, that should be our priority, not $600 million for the Cross-Base Highway, which does put a major encroachment onto the military. In 1995, when I was on the BRAC, I was a staff officer at McCord Air Force Base, we considered the Cross-Base Highway our #1 encroachment to the viability of McCord Air Force Base, McCord Field. And I still think it is probably not a good project to go forward on anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. First, quickly on GM and Chrysler, I think this is another good example. Dick says, well, if we hadn't bailed them out, they'd still be there and everything would be fine. That's the choice involved. If you want to say you didn't want to bail them out, fine, but they did go into bankruptcy, okay? They had to refinance themselves, they had to restructure, but that's the imaginary world that an opponent can live in. If you just sort of didn't spend the money, it would still be there and everything would be fine. That's not the way it works. You have to make choices, and I think it's fair to live with the consequences of choices. If you want to stand up and say, if GM and Chrysler were gone, and 100,000 or so jobs were gone, you'd be okay with that, that's fine. But to stand up and say they would still be here and we wouldn't have had to spend the money just isn't realistic. And at an absolute minimum, what I've always done as your congressman is been honest with you about the choices we make. And believe me, one time or another, I think I've disagreed with everybody I represent. But I'm honest about the choices and what is going to come out of it. Not pretending, not promising you something for nothing. That's what has really got us into this mess. Republicans and Democrats promising something for nothing and imagining that, for instance, we can balance the budget without cutting anything. You'll hear a lot from Dick about how important the deficit is. I challenge you to go to his website and find one thing that he proposes cutting. He proposes cutting taxes, which actually adds to the deficit. But where is the plan to actually get that balanced budget agreement or balanced budget amendment that he talks about? If we had a balanced budget amendment, we would have to cut $1.4 trillion out of the federal budget right now, today. Okay, if that's the choice, that's what you want to do, put it on the table. Tell us where that $1.4 trillion comes from. Don't imagine that you're going to have a balanced budget and have no problems. On transportation, I've been a consistent supporter of the projects that are important to move this district forward. And I do think the federal government has a small role to play. Port of Tacoma, Port of Seattle, they ship goods all over the country. We need to help fund the local projects that get them done to make sure that we can continue to get those goods to market. Shaw Road is a great example. One final quick point. Dick has said that he will not support any sort of earmarks, any sort of local funding. So on Shaw Road and on every single other issue, you're not getting any help from your congressman if it's Dick Muri. I think those earmarks have to be transparent, open, and available to people, but I do think our district deserves some support because of the national role that we play. Thank you.